Rachel, do you want to add anything here in terms of...
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Some quick housekeeping for the question. We're going to have a presentation by Vivian with some slides that we will post later on our website. After the brief presentation, we will have a good long question and answer session. We ask that you post your questions in the chat box so that we can capture them to post FAQs later today or soon in the following week. So please, questions in the chat box. We're going to keep you muted for now.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, just to remind everyone, thank you for the folks of you that have already sent us a whole lot of questions. We're compiling those already, and since time is short, we will try and answer those today, but certainly have those addressed in the coming days through the FAQ. Right, so now I'm going to do just a short 10-minute presentation, which is going to give an overview of the OT, the reasoning behind this, some expectations from NIH. Most of this should cover what you read in the solicitation. It's really just to give you an overview to that. I'm assuming the majority of the people here are already interested in this and know a lot of it. Right, so I'm going to move to the next slide, which hopefully will come up. It won't. Okay. So the turning is just that. Okay, I'll get you to do it. All right, let's just quickly look at, firstly, where this program is situated. This program is at NIH and part of the Common Fund program. Some of you have dealt with Common Fund, some of you have not. Essentially, Common Fund is part of the Office of the Director, or OD, and the Common Fund addresses very large, challenging obstacles in research and the idea to capitalize on these kind of new scientific emerging opportunities. For those of you who've seen Common Fund programs, they're quite diverse and they're quite large, and the data commons itself has the fortune of having a very similar name. The other thing about the Common Fund is they're looking for very large catalytic programs that really have high impact goals and a cutting edge science in the order of 5 to 10 years. So they're longer than some of the other programs we've seen at NIH. They're very goal driven. So although there's research there, there's also very much a goal in terms of what our attempts is, what we want to get out of this particular program. And again, referencing back to the OT, the intent there is to have a series of capabilities where we can really show some defined use of these data sets in new computational environments. Another thing here is we're looking at promoting the mission of multiple NIH institutes, and there are multiple institutes here. We're working directly with the 3 data sets that have been discussed in the OT, and they both Common Fund but also NHGRI and also NHRBI, and the awards will actually be through NHRBI. So there are examples of trying to get rid of the mute. Just trying to get rid of that screeching sound. So again, please mute yourself if you are not talking. All right, so back to the purpose of Common Fund. It's really looking at trans-NIH programs that are large and impactful across NIH, and they're cross-cutting. It requires a high level of coordination, and we work very closely with ICs. It's quite different from IC-based programs, and we welcome all of the folks that are here with me at the moment from the various ICs, folks that have also been contributing to this program that got to this far. All right, let's go to the next slide. Let's have a look at the Data Commons as a pilot phase overview. Many of you would have known the Big Data to Knowledge program, and essentially the Commons, or the Data Commons, is coming as a second phase of this program. And we're going to be looking at essentially providing a collection of NIH-funded data sets and making them available in public clouds with associated tools and systems. In particular, we're looking at using a test phase here for 3 particular data sets, and we'll speak more about that probably later. Those 3 data sets were chosen just as a starting point, which is why this is a pilot phase. Those data sets are TopMed, GText, and MODS, and they are test cases for the principles and policies that we'll be using in this particular program, and also to develop the architectures we expect to see. The overall goal here is we're realizing that at NIH we have incredibly large data sets and incredibly valuable data sets that people want to consume. And we're finding that many people are wanting to use public clouds to be able to do this. And we're looking for methods to ensure that the data sets are highly usable by all the research community in a way that these data sets can be stored, shared, accessed, and computed on in the right environment for people to be able to do this work. And I think there's a lot of background information that has happened over the last 2 years, which has shown people are moving to the cloud in a variety of different forms. What we're trying to do here is follow that step to figure out what's the right way to have this data available in those systems, what's the architecture to support it, and importantly, how do we do this given the fact that subject data that has elicits all the issues with human subject concerns, the health issues associated with that, and we're very concerned about those issues, so we're being very careful about that, and that's why they're being discussed also in this OT. All right, the project is going to go for a period of 4 years, and the budget is approximately... How do I get to my next slide? Got it? Perfect. All right, let's have a look. I'm going to briefly just go what's already in the OT. There are 8 key technical scientific computing capabilities, which I'm not going to go through here in detail. You've all had a chance to look at those. And we're also looking at a set of some minimum standards, which really relate to openness, portability, interoperability of whatever is going to be developed. Those are also described in the OT. And we're encouraging applicants to have very innovative approaches to the way that you do this. And we also would like to see address not necessarily one capability. You could address one, more, or any of those capabilities. That has been a question that has come up a number of times. Can we address more than one capability? Yes. It's up to you to decide how you want to do that. What I'm also saying here is for those key capabilities, when you do that, you must be able to justify why you'd be doing one or more or a collection of those. We're also happy to have additional capabilities suggested, but we really want you to be able to clearly justify and describe those. And if you have a new or an additional capability and you want to have it connected to one of the other ones that we've described, that is also fine. But you, again, have to justify it extremely well. Right, so in terms of the OT, let's have a look at those pieces. So what I just covered now was the 8 capabilities and some of the standards we have, and the fact that we're able to mix and match. You can apply to either one or multiple ones, and you can come in as groups to look at that or not. It is up to you. We're encouraging the community to actually have input on how you want to organize around doing this. We would like to see those innovative approaches from the community. Talk a little bit more about the process here, since it is new to many folks, which is it's an other transaction, it's an OT. So what we're going to do is have 2 stages. We expect to have an award, which is an OT, the other transaction award, to support a number of different projects that we think will be responsive to the solicitation and are considered, as I was saying before, high impact, cutting edge, and have really good ideas that we can actually implement. We also expect awardees to form a consortium, which will be called the Data Commons Pilot Phase Consortium, DCPPC, which is noted many times in the solicitation. And we will also expect the awardees of this solicitation to be working with the investigators that are funded to do the data sets with TopMed, MODS, and GText. And it will be a collection of those folks. So those awarded from this solicitation and those investigators coming from TopMed and GText. Please mute your phones if you are not talking. So stage 1 is essentially to form a consortia of a collection of folks that would be from this solicitation, including the investigators, MOD, and GText. And I know I'm repeating myself, but I want to make it clear because I've had multiple questions asking me this multiple times. So I'm just wanting to make it clear we're looking at these 3 data sets to start with. So in the first stage, we expect this consortium to form together and be working together for up to 180 days. And our goal out of that is to come up with a series of prototypes and also a plan of what would make sense going forward. We're aware of some of the components that we need for this particular work, but we're also aware that we need to do some investigations and get a better understanding of what's actually needed. Once that first stage is completed, we expect stage 2 to be an evaluation, and we negotiate revised terms of current awards. We may be looking at extending things we may want to add things. Those plans will inform us about what we do next. So stage 1 is essentially the planning and prototyping, and stage 2 would be the longer-term implementation of some of those. All right, let's get to some more practical aspects of the OT, because again, we've had multiple questions. The letter of intent is required and is mandated for this, and it is due on June 30th. There are no extensions to this. There have been a number of questions about this. This will be the date, June 30th, 5 p.m. United States Eastern Standard Time. LOIs will be reviewed for their programmatic relevance. This will be done by July 7th, 2017, and then based on that, selected groups will be invited to submit an application on or around July 12th, and only those that have been invited can apply for the actual full application. So do not put in your application if you've not been invited. The final applications are due July 31, 2017. If you've not been invited, do not put in an application. If you do, it will not be reviewed. Mandatory kickoff will be on October 25, and this is a kickoff meeting for that data consortium to get together. The Data Commons Consortium to get together.
I'm done.
Please mute your phones. Thank you. All right. Let's look a little bit more at the details of the letter of intent. I'll go through this relatively quickly, but I'm just putting it up there because there's been a lot of questions which really I answered by reading the solicitation. We're asking that you have a letter of intent. As I mentioned before, it is required. You cannot get to the next step without it. If you do not put a letter of intent in, you will not be able to put an application in at all. These are the kinds of descriptive pieces that we want you to have in your letter of intent. Obviously, the number and title of research opportunity, descriptive title, and for each of the capabilities, these various aspects. I'm not going to go through these in a lot of detail. I'm just putting them up here directly. They're taken directly from the OT solicitation. I'm just drawing your attention to them to ensure that you actually comply with the requests here. Again, if you have any questions to this, and also once you complete your LOI, ensure that you mail it to this address, commonspilot@od.nih.gov. There are a lot of folks out there in the community who know me, and as much as I appreciate your emails, we really need these to be compiled onto this particular mailbox. So please send your mail to this particular mailbox. There are a lot of emails coming in and a lot of inquiries, and there is a team which is looking at this mailbox, not just me. So in order to have a rapid turnaround time, ensure that you will send your mails to this particular mailbox. All right, the full application. And I'll get to this a little bit when we talk about the OT a little bit more. This is a different kind of animal to a grant and a contract. So as stated here, it's not a typical NIH grant. Here is an outline of what we expect in the full application. Again, it comes out of the solicitation, but we're looking for short but clear identification of how you're going to address those key capabilities. What's your intent there? Why do you think you're going to do what you're doing, and how are you going to support that, both in terms of the science and technology you're doing and the people that would be there that would be supporting those particular tasks. Some form of budget is required, budget justification. We're not setting limits on this. We'd like to see what people are willing to do. Why? I think being a realistic budget is what my recommendation would be. Evaluation. There will be an objective review phase for both parts. There will be obviously one for the letter of intent, and it's based on the team members, your key personnel, the past performance, outline and activities, and the adequacy and appropriate available resources. Please mute your phone if you are not talking, and that's me at the moment. The application, which will be obviously longer, has slightly broader requests, and you're looking at the vision statement for what you're doing, the plan, the specifics around the relevant components and those key capabilities, also how you plan to engage with the community, and how you would demonstrate the value of this particular project. I think it's important to show your past performance and the expertise of your team members. We want to see that you have ability in this area. Again, the OT, not standard contract or grant, is looking at implementation parts for some of these things. We're not looking so much for the research, we're looking for the R&D and then the production of some of this. Again, in relation to the budget, we're not defining the actual budget. We're asking you to provide it, but it has to be appropriate for what you're requesting. Other considerations, just a few comments around the budget. It's 21 over a 4-year period. However, Because of the way the OTs are structured, there's significant flexibility in our ability to handle OTs, and the adjustments will be made based on the work that we're actually doing and what we're actually finding. This gives us a lot more flexibility to be able to get to an endpoint and have milestones achieved, and that's part of the reason we want to be flexible here. The period of performance is between 3 and 4 years. Again, it's somewhat flexible. It depends on the outcome of these particular awards. And advice. So there's one more slide that I think was missing here. Can we go back? It got skipped, this one. Number 4. Yes, I don't know why that didn't show up, but it didn't. Did it? Okay. So I just want to raise this slide, which, my apologies, it got somehow skipped in the process. I want to highlight the issue about other transactions. As I've mentioned before, it's a unique funding mechanism that's not a grant or cooperative agreement or a contract. And why are we doing this? Because this kind of project requires us to be far more flexible, and we want to work with different kinds of partners. That means academics, researchers, and commercial entities. And I just want to say that very clearly again. That means academics, researchers, and commercial entities. There have been a number of questions that have come in saying, can I partner with a commercial entity? The answer is yes. We also might expect that commercial entities on their own would apply for this. That is also okay. So in terms of the OT, we have a publication on the website, which all of you have now seen, I presume. And as I just mentioned now, it encourages non-traditional partners, again, because of the nature of what we're trying to do, which is strongly technology-based to support biomedical research. NIH just has some track record in dealing with technologies in computational areas, but it's still obviously very focused on the bio side of things. So in this case, we're realizing that some of our partnerships are going to have to happen with those folks in different technology areas that don't traditionally apply for grants or work with NIH. And creating those kind of partnerships and the right relationships is really paramount, and the ability for this particular solicitation to be effective. So that is the reason why we're using this OT mechanism. In terms of the evaluation, I talked about this a little bit before, but we'll have the objective review criteria, which I've discussed in these slides. They are also presented in detail in the solicitation itself. There will be interactive discussions with program staff and also external experts as needed for the review. And we will also be looking at selections of which components of these applications that have come in make the most sense to achieve the goals that we have for this particular project. As I mentioned many times now, the award DOT allows us a level of flexibility. The award can have several aspects. It can be expanded, it can be modified, we can look at different partnerships, we can not support, we can discontinue. These are the kinds of things we need to do to be more agile in the way that we actually go towards this project. Leadership at NIH, and by that I mean Dr. Francis Collins, who's the director of NIH, is very keen, along with some other institute directors, to develop these particular areas and engagements in both technology and in science. And we know that we have to be agile and flexible towards this. We also know that we are looking at new experiences in partnering with non-traditional members in the community, particularly in the computing sciences and mathematics. And so we'll be able to be flexible about how we operate in the environment as we learn from that as well. All of these activities are based on the fact on, obviously, program need, emerging needs as we go through the program and find out what we need to do, and we assess. The technology approaches that we use, we realize that some of these will be brand new to us, and we have to assess whether they have value. And obviously the availability of funds, that's based on the NIH budget, the budget available to us in this program. Now what I will do is go to the very last slide, and I apologize for missing this one, but this is an important one because this talks about the actual mechanism. I'm just going to reiterate this because I know this will come up multiple times. It's not a grant, it's not a cooperative agreement, and it's not a contract. The transaction, it's an OT. Some of the questions I've had have come in from folks who are obviously very used to dealing with grants, cooperative agreements, and or contracts. And this is quite different for a lot of people. There are not that many OTs that are running at NIH. I think the PMI initiative is one, and I think there's in the Spark initiative from the Common Fund one. And again, the reason for these is, again, the flexibility for being able to do this, particularly at cutting-edge science, and also to incorporate non-traditional partners. So I just want to finish up with these two slides, and the advice I you is to read the opportunity, read the opportunity, read the opportunity. I would put that in multiple languages if I can, because some of the questions I've received already, you either haven't read it or you need to reread it. It seems to be something that I think would be valid for you to look at. The FAQ, which Rachel Britt just described before and is live on our website, will be updated with the questions that we've received so far this week and also the ones we received from this webinar. In terms of your actual LOI, and if you go to the stage for application, be as specific as possible. Be clear about what you're actually asking for and why. You have a very short space to articulate what it is that you need to do, and we need you to be clear and specific. Do not distort reality. I have seen many people claim they can do a bunch of things, but in fact they cannot. So if you cannot do that, it would be not a good place for you to be in terms of the way you write your LOI or your application. Be clear, be straightforward, and be clear about your actual abilities. Do not waste pages. Do not pad a lot of your, you certainly can't with the LOI, it's short, or the application with extraneous information. We are looking, how can you address those key capabilities, keeping in mind those 6 standards that we've articulated, and how can you come out with something that could really be articulated as a prototype or help us understand how to develop very concrete plans within 6 months. If you just have an idea that you want to take from an idea and look at it as a research piece, this is not the opportunity that you want to apply for. And justify everything you're actually doing. If you just simply say you can do it, but you can't actually justify why you're doing that, that is a concern for us. And that applies to the key capabilities that you're addressing, to the team personnel, to the budget you're actually applying for. Lastly, the contacts for this particular solicitation are myself for the research and science and technology parts. That's me, that's Vivian Bonazzi. I'm from the Office of the Director. And for the financial agreements side and the contract side, who is Teresa Marquette, who is here with us, and has also had extensive experience in dealing with OTs, so we're very lucky to have her. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, NHLBI will be handling the awards and be processed, and we're most grateful to be able to work with them. All right, with that, that's the conclusion of what I've got to say. I think we'll open it up for questions. And I think anyone can ask us some questions, or do we have any from the chat box?
In hot bathtub with water, filled with water, and wait until maybe 5, 7, 10 minutes, and then.
What was that? Yeah, it's very difficult to hear people, so what I suggest is put all your questions through the chat box, please. Do we have some? There's some already. Do you think I can read them? Yeah. I'm just looking, there's silence because I'm just looking through them now. Still looking. All right, let's see what we're looking at. All right, there's a question here about the rush of this. This has been a program that has been under development for over a year and a half, and there are multiple reasons we want to get this out as quickly as we can. Some of that is available budget, time frame. It's something we actually have to get done, and we want to try and get it done as quickly as we can. Unfortunately, that drives some of the crunch that we have, but we're trying to do our best to give as much information to the community about this, given the constraints we're actually under. Do you want to take any of these, Alistair? Do you want to do a FSMA compliant one? Do that one if you want. Right, what we'll also do is there is a team here in the room, and some of us from NIH who are on the phone, who have different capabilities and skill sets. So we have Alistair Thompson, the CIO of NHLBI, and working very closely with us on development. Teresa Marquette, who's from the contracts office at NHLBI. Jeff Snyder, also from NHLBI, from the legal team. There's Rachel Britt here and Sanika from our comms team. Marie Nieris, who's from OD, who's going to be handling the review. Myself, and I think that's all we have on the phone.
A slight correction. This is Teresa Marquette from the Agreements Office from NHLBI. I am neither a grants officer or a contracts officer. Oh, I'm an agreements officer, so that's why it aligns with the OT. So
okay, an agreements officer. My apologies.
That's okay.
We also have Melissa Garcia here from NHLBI. So we have a full crew here that are looking at this whole OT. So any other questions, please?
So this is Alistair. So a question about, is FSMA compliance required? The security requirements are the same as they are for all other extramural activities involving controlled access data. So there's good documentation on the grants.nih.gov site on what's required for that.
Great. There's a question here about the limit of 21 million on a project. What is the limit on each individual project? We don't.
We don't know.
We don't know. You propose what budget is, and you have to justify what it is that you want to do. What else am I going to say? Key personnel should be full-time for the time. That, again, is up to you. If you assemble the team, you decide what it is that you want to apply for, and you decide what the percentage of that person is available for. Like all things at NIH, though, as you put in the request for your key personnel, if they are already subject to 150% of their time on other projects, which we'll be asking for other support on this, then that will be queried here. So you better have those team members defined for the time that they are truly available and needed for this particular project. Any other questions?
Hello, can you hear me?
Sure.
Yeah, so there's this other question that you have not addressed. It's asking about the duration of this pilot stage. Is it to be for the entire 3 to 4 years, or are you looking just at the initial 180 days for stage 1?
Stage 1 is 180 days, and the whole program is 3 to 4 years. Does that help? Okay. Other questions from the phone? If not, I'm still looking at the ones in the chat box. Okay, they're all muted. Any other questions we have? Yep, go ahead. Who was asking a question?
Do you have an expectation that successful applicants have existing partnerships with users of one or more of the 3 data sets, or do you expect that to be a key component of stage 1, formation of those partnerships?
There'll be both. If you have, if you already have relationships with those folks, that's great. But we will also create those afterwards. What we don't want to do is bias people that don't have those relationships. Okay? So.
Hi, Vivian. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. One question I have is, can you tell us what drove the decision to choose the data sets that you're representing and asking us to work with?
Yeah, I think leadership was looking at a collection of what high-value, high-volume data sets. And those, why? Because storage of these data sets is becoming problematic and being able to access them. So TopMed is obviously very large, as is GText. MODS is smaller, but it's a high-value data set that gets high usage. And so what the NIH leadership, and by that I mean Francis Collins and a collection of the other institute directors, were looking at what would be a good test case for this. So those were chosen for those reasons, and again, they covered different institutes. We realized they are genomics-based, and we realized that we have to expand a little more than that in the future. So maybe I can address a question that came in through a couple of different sources, and it was asked in a couple of different ways, and that is additional data sets. So let's first address what's in the solicitation specifically. Again, if I'm repeating myself, I'm doing this on purpose so that we can hopefully be clear, and if you just hear me say it again and again, you know that I've said it. That's good, because hopefully you understand it. So those 3 data sets we've chosen, TopMed, GText, and MODS, were chosen for the reasons I just said. But in the solicitation, I also say that if you have additional data sets that are relevant to expanding or understanding this project, you are welcome to bring those. They have to be extremely well justified. And it's not a case of bringing those data sets in just because you want to bring an additional data set. They have to be ancillary to and supportive of the work that we're doing with the original 3. So the questions that I've received outside, some of the questions are, can I bring new data sets? The answer is no, except under the context of the solicitation if it supports the current data sets we have. Another question is, do you have plans for additional data sets? Not at this time in the pilot, but we're fully aware that this is the kind of project that we're, there are more than obviously these 3 data sets that are large and of high value. We are very interested in learning about that, and we expect to have some communication with the community a little later, hopefully sometime this year, if not early next year, to engage with the community to have a better understanding of the kind of data sets that they might like to see up there and the kind of priorities associated with those and the kind of reasoning about why those data sets would be made available. So I think that covers some of the questions I've been asked in the various flavors in relation to data sets, and I hope that helps. I've been asked to look at what was the one about multi-institution. Can you scroll back up to that, please? Can you confirm that multi-institution teams should respond with a single joint ROI at 3 or separate LOIs? Yes, we would like you to come in with 1 LOI. Any other questions?
Hi, yes, Vivian, I do have another question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
So I think, certainly for myself and perhaps many others, in looking at the sponsoring institute for this announcement, as we began to think about scientific use cases, we're trying to reconcile the data sets that you're asking us to draw from and then constructing scientific use cases that were supportive of programs and agenda that were resident within Heart, Lung, Blood Institute. And, at least, in my case, looking at some of those data sets, I don't think it was intuitively obvious, particularly as we referenced the MOD data set and linked out to the Alliance genome resource, where most of the data was heavily circumscribed around neuronal disorders. And so that was a bit of a disconnect for me. Can you speak to that?
I don't actually quite understand what your question is. Is it that you're concerned about the data set and the content of it, that you can't actually develop a use case because you're not close to the data, or is it something different? Does that make sense? The gentleman who just asked that question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It looks like I went back on mute. So no, it was less about proximity, but more so about the relevancy of the data to a particular disease therapeutic area that might be of interest to heart, lung, blood. And so whereas TopMed clearly represents those types of data, at least in the case of the MOD database, it did not seem to contain data that was immediately relevant to things that might reside in Heart, Lung, Blood Institute. I hope that's a bit clearer.
So let me see if you can just put yourself back on mute again, because we've got background. First of all, I'm Shot and then Melissa Garcia is here from NHLBI from the TopMed project, from one of the scientific leads there. So first of all, the data sets are not necessarily, if you want to look at a use case for therapeutic one, the use case that was put in the OT was just an example. It's not limited to that. It's an example of what you may want to consider. It has a therapeutic bent, but that's not the intent for any of the other use cases. The MODs obviously are a bit further away and more in understanding human disease overall and human genome structure than it would be necessarily for a specific disease, although I could argue that as well. So it's really a case of what scientific question would you want to address based on any of those data sets, rather than us and having a particular slant that we want to take.
Yeah, and this is Melissa Garcia. Also, I want everyone to recognize that, especially for TopMed and GTAGs, which are the data, and I'm most familiar with TopMed, all of the cohorts that have gone into the TopMed program are very diverse in phenotyping. They're not limited to heart, lung, and blood. There's really just a wide gamut of phenotypes, almost anything you can think of, especially from the Framingham study that's been in existence for so long, but also for a lot of the other cohort studies. So I really think the sky's the limit. And with the subclinical measures, the imaging data, just really there's so much information in a lot of the TopMed studies that opens up the flexibility to connect it with other data sets such as MODS. So the creativity from the research community is what we're hoping for, to see that potential and make the connections. Thanks.
Does that help answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Vivian, this is Owen.
Question.
Hang on a second, Owen. Jeff Snyder's got something to add, and then after that, Owen, please speak.
There was a question about whether or not participation in Phase 1 would implicate a potential organizational conflict of interest issue in Phase 2, and the answer to that is no. Participation in Phase 1 would not be a CI issue in Phase 2.
All right, Owen, one last question from you, but before you do that, I've been asked here, just in terms of fairness of all participants, that we'd prefer to have everything done through the chat box for questions. Simply, it depends on who's able to unmute and create some issues there. So because you asked Owen, you're the last one to do that, and then we'll go back to the chat box. So go for it, Owen.
Well, to be brief, it was a question based on one that was already asked, about 4,000 words per key component or for the entire proposal. And I'll jump offline.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Hi, this is Marie, and this is a question. This is Marie Nyaras, and I'm acting as a review officer for this. This is a question for that pertains to the full application, whether it's not to exceed 4,000 words and 2 figures, and it says per key capability.
Okay. So just to reiterate again, I'm going to be painful, but just to be really clear here, if we can take the questions through the chat box, please, since it's just really difficult for people muting and unmuting. All right, I'll be looking at the chat box at the moment.
So there's a question there about whether can existing commercial intellectual property be incorporated into a proposed solution, and what are the ramifications? The foundations for the data commons must be open source. All the core components must be open source. Organizations with IP are welcome to contribute them. However, they would have to contribute them in the form of open source. With that said, we anticipate that commercial organizations will build products on top of the data commons that are not part of the data commons, but we encourage them to leverage it with their own IP in the interest of the community.
All right, we have another question here about budget. I'm just going to say what I said before, and the question around budget was, I know you've scrolled up. Okay, the question on budget again was, what's the limit? How do I justify that? I think I'm trying to look for it on the chat box here, but it came along the same thing. And I've also had questions sent to our mailbox along that line. There we go. Can you outline the kind of items you expect in stage 1 budget? Again, I think it's depending what you want to do. The idea behind this is to not predefine how we're going to do the commons. The idea here is the community to self-organize in groups, individuals, as otherwise, of how you would approach this. And there's a very strong reason for that. We don't want to overly prescribe this kind of work. Some of the folks on the line know this is the kind of work that I've been doing for a couple of years, but I'm very strongly of the opinion that, and I think the rest of NIH feels the same way, being prescriptive from the government perspective is not what we want to do. We want to ensure that we get the best ideas from the community and how they would approach that. So if you want to look at just one of the key capabilities and you come in as, say, a small business that you feel very strongly that you've got great capabilities in that, and your budget isn't very big because it's a small component, but it's a critical one and you do that very well, that's okay. We're not going to judge that poorly against another consortium group that comes in with a much larger budget. Your budget is going to be based upon what you're proposing, how you plan to do that, and how well you can justify that. Obviously, we've got a limit in the kind of budget we have, and we presumably wouldn't be looking at one proposal at $21 million. That's obviously not what we're going to do. But we're also trying to be open in both the approach that you want to take and tell us what budget you would justify. We did have some questions, which I've had in the last day or so, asking about consortia of folks that come from academia and commercial companies. We're very well aware that the commercial rates are higher and they are different. Again, all we're asking is justify what it is that you're suggesting you want to do and how you want to do that. We're aware that industry does that. That is also the reason why we're using an OT. We want to encourage a collection of different businesses with different capabilities and different types to actually work with us. All right? All right, there's a question here about, in addition to system development, how much effort would you expect for evaluation? Can you not scroll down? Thank you. Scroll back up. All right, in addition to system development, how much effort would you expect for evaluation in terms of feasibility and performance? I think phase one is all about figuring out what we're going to do. And so therefore, in your LOI and those who go to the application phase, we're asking you for really clear justifications of what you would want to do and why you would want to do that. So systems development will be dependent upon what we see as a set of plans that are valuable to attain. Keep in mind, we're also looking for small, short prototypes that give us an evaluation of how we could get where we need to go. There's a lot of technology testing that has to occur in the compute environments. There's also protocols for handling authentication authorization. There's also components there for, obviously APIs. We speak about this in the OTA, about the way the APIs will connect to data, to the services associated to that. So there will be some development upon that, but what we don't want to do is create one large monolithic system. We want to test the various components for doing that, and we're fully aware that having multiple groups makes that somewhat harder in doing that, but at the same time we're engaging a broader community and actually getting to an understanding of what we could do. That is why we want various people to work together. In terms of the development, I don't know what that's going to be. Once we come together as a consortium, some of those definitions will be done. What you have to show in your application or your LOA is your capacity and your capability to address those issues. That you have to show clearly, because whatever we're going to do is going to have to be able to leverage what is said that you could do in your LOI or in your application. Go for it.
Hi, this is Marie again. I just wanted to answer the question about whether or not international organizations can apply. Yes, international organizations may apply.
Thank you, Marie. I also would say that there is no problem, as far as I understand, to have international collaborations working with the US group as leads, as however you wish to organize. We realize that our colleagues in overseas places have different technologies and skills, and there are some parallel efforts here. And where possible, we'd like to reuse some of those. We're aware of some of the standards that are being used in various parts of the world, and if they've had applications of those, they don't necessarily need to be shown as only US. They can be outside of that, and we would encourage that. Okay. I'm just looking at this one. Please don't scroll past that. Okay, I'm going to read this out aloud. So a primary concern in the past for cloud resources has been the use of cloud resources by a global community. I'm not entirely sure what that means. Alistair, you might have a...
So the question is really about cost controls.
Yeah, that's right.
So one of the areas for us to be looking at in this, particularly in phase 2, will be implementing some form of cost control so that, as you know, that we can actually manage the risk of accelerating costs of cloud resources. We also anticipate that many will want to bring their own compute resources to the clouds in order to leverage agreements that they already have, which will also assist with that.
Right. Another one, issue about costs, and this is something that NIH is trying to determine from understanding this pilot. We've had multiple examples over the last period of time, certainly 1 to 2 years. Noticed people moving large data sets onto public clouds for a period of time and then removing them. There are obvious reasons for that. Cost is one of those, because you cannot maintain it. It's too expensive to maintain it on public resources. NIH is aware of that, and one of the things we're looking at is what is the cost to maintain a highly used data set, the large or small, on these environments, and those costs to be borne by NIH, because that way we can best facilitate biomedical research, that you're not bearing the cost of simply that, the storage aspect of that. That is one of the things that we're trying to ascertain in the pilot. So there's a cost issue there. That's the storage one. Understanding which storage to use, whether it's online, nearline, offline, etc., is part of what we want to understand here. What is the cost of storing in different individual clouds? How does that cost us? We are aware there are also costs within some of these systems. What are those costs? Where do they come, and where are they getting charged? We're understanding that researchers have, as they look at their standard R01s with many institutions, a lot of their compute costs are getting sucked up in storage and use of computes, and therefore not much is left in those R01s to do the actual science. So we're trying to understand how to better manage these new environments to better serve the community, and that's part of the issue. So we're trying to understand all of those cost issues. The flip side of that is the compute. So obviously we need to be able to pay for that compute, and how to do that is also part of what we'd like to understand. If that happens, what's the best route for that to be attained? And we're also in the process of understanding that work. There's several pilots already going on that we're testing, and we'll be able to explain a little bit more to the community as time goes about the compute side of it. The whole focus on the cost is, where does the government pay for certain storage and why? What does it cost us to maintain these data sets over time and why? How do we use those, and how do we best serve the community in the longer term so that the use of the grant dollars and the contract dollars goes towards doing biomedical stuff, not in a lot of the overhead costs that go into maintaining these. We're aware of it, and that's part of what this project is trying to define.
So I have a question. It sounds like the intent is to provide a data common software stack where individuals can implement one or more parts of the stack. Can you speak a little on this? While part of this is to provide an environment where individuals and organizations can innovate in terms of what the software is, the program goes far beyond that. It is designed to provide a platform for science. And part of the demonstrations that we'll be looking for is how it addresses is capable of addressing scientific questions, not just it's an interesting software stack that is able to be leveraged.
And that software stack happens on two sides, which is, does it help with cost and efficiency? That's important, right? If that can reduce it, that's important. And the other side of that is, can you more easily be able to ask and address biomedical questions? Particularly because we recognize that there are many biomedical scientists supported by NIH that don't have strong computational backgrounds, and we're wanting to make sure that we can figure out the right way to connect with those folks. In saying all that, we know that we can't develop a ginormous system to start with. We have to various pieces and test it and be small and agile. And we realize that some of the underlying technology has to happen as we roll along and probably has to happen first. But we cannot lose sight of the fact that we're also trying to serve a broader biomedical community.
This is Marie again. No, your LOI does not need signing from your authorized official. You can send an LOI in normally do. Thank you.
We're just reading through the chat box. These are great questions. Thank you. Keep sending them in. But I can't. Unfortunately, my brain is not a cloud, and therefore it takes me a while to process a little bit. The question here says, I represent a company not involved in clinical medical science application solutions for fair science, providing workspaces and interoperability and so forth. is such an application of interest to NIH. Also not sure what the PI in that situation. So again, part of the reason we're using an OT is to fully understand the project has a lot of tech, IT, computing components, which is traditionally not what NIH. And we are encouraging groups that have those kind of backgrounds, because if you have a workspace and you have ways that you think observability can run and we could leverage that, then we encourage you to apply. Not sure what the PI would be in that situation. You would be the PI in that applied to, say, do the key capability related to workspaces. That would be the role that you would have. And our trustee team here at NIH would help you figure out how to navigate that. That we're going to have, like yourself, don't have the traditional background and knows. You just want to make sure you don't go away thinking that you can't apply because you haven't been a traditional NIH applier.
We got a question about which are the 3 ICs that were supporting this initiative. Again, those were NHLBI, Heart, Lung, and Blood, NHGRI, which is the Human Genome Institute, and Common Fund, which is in the Office of the Director.
Another question that's come up for me is about consortiums. Yes, you can form them by consortia. Let's be careful about the nomenclature here. Groups that want to form together to apply for one or more of the key capabilities. That's fine if you want to do that. We have that, but we are not the clearinghouse for doing that. We've had a number of questions about whether we provide connection points for other folks. That is for you to decide how you want to do that and to arrange your organizations within that role.
This is Jeff Snyder from NHLBI. Just to add on to that, when you do form a consortium, it is often helpful if you have an articles of collaboration or some sort of teaming arrangement. Yeah.
Question about use cases, how they would impact, how would the use case impact, where do I see that?
Here, impact the development of the
Yeah, basically, the one I gave you was just an example. You can, other ones, we're not confining it to that. You need to think about it in the context of those data sets, but we're not limiting to one.
Can you scroll down if there's new ones?
Yeah, can we go down?
Just checkbox to get a better understanding.
Can't hear Vivian right
Can't
now.
hear me right now? Well, that's because you spelled my name wrong. If you spelled it right, I would know. That's okay, John. I'm fine with that. All right.
Access to TopMed data.
Which was that?
Access to TopMed data.
Yeah.
Will the data become available outside that mechanism?
Melissa, do you want to take that one?
Will the TopMed data be available?
No, it says access to TopMed data currently provided in TopMed Study Center. Will this data become available outside that mechanism?
So there is TopMed data that is publicly available in dbGaP. There's the data access process that has to be followed. So that's currently the way to get access to a subset of the first release of the TopMed data that will be publicly available. And if that changes, the group working on this will be prized.
And the intent for the phase of the pilot is to only use that publicly accessible 9,000 cases.
Correct. Thanks.
There's a question that asks whether or not the announcement is on grants.gov. It was posted directly to the Common Fund website. We are issuing a guide notice that will go through but the announcement itself is only on the Common Fund website.
I want to address an issue that came up from the question we just came up here. It says, clearly between now and June 30, people will be overwhelmed. There were questions about speed of what we had to do this. I said before that part of the reason for that was simply the nature of what we have to do in the context of NIH. I'd like to also point out that we are also working very quickly and are somewhat overwhelmed with the work that we're doing here. Yes, this is fast. But I'd like to also point out that the nature of an OT is this is a starting point. We can extend things in OTs. We can add things in OTs. So as we move along in understanding our prototypes and understanding the plans, should we feel that there's a need for additional technologies, understanding, etc., the OT provides us a cover, a bridge, able to add additional components should we actually need that. That is extremely the way that certainly grants operate. It's extremely long, time-consuming, and difficult to do supplements, and the community feels
very
limited to that. Guys, please mute yourself, or we will mute you. Thanks. The point I'm trying to make here is that although this is a fast turnaround and we appreciate that, it's fast for all of us, and we're trying to do the best we can. On the plus side, Francis Collins and the rest of the IC directors feel very strongly about this project, and we have support from him. In my time at NIH, I don't think I've seen Francis read the detail he spent with looking at this FOA, or this ROA, my apologies. And that shows, I think, the level of commitment that our leadership is putting towards this. Having said that, and we're all rushing towards this, as we enter stage one, we expect to be able to think about what additional things we might need and why, and bring those in as appropriate for those. So we do expect to see additional opportunities. It's not like a usual grant or some contracts, which is often limited only to that particular funding announcement. I don't know if you guys want to, Jeff, has anything?
Yeah, this is Jeff Snyder from NIH. Just to follow on that, absolutely. For OT, everything is essentially subject to renegotiation. So if we get into something and we see that there's a component we need to add or there's something we need to subtract, we would come to you and propose that we negotiate that. So again, with OT, it's very, very different. Nothing is set in stone. It's a collaborative, negotiated arrangement.
This is Melissa. There was a question about curating the pilot, the data sets that will go into the pilot commons, and that will be done in conjunction with the data coordinating centers for each of the projects, each of the programs.
Let me handle the one about dbGaP. Please don't scroll that one. dbGaP doesn't allow redistribution of their data. If we didn't get data from dbGaP, how do we deal with that in context? We're aware of that. Part of what we're trying to do here is realize that a lot of the data which sits inside dbGaP is actually needed in these environments. I was involved, along with NCBI and a number of folks at NIH, helping in changing the position statements for the use of dbGaP data in the cloud. There are notice points within our solicitation that cover this, and we're fully aware of it. I've been doing, myself and a number of the team here have been working very closely with Patty Brennan and also NCBI to figure out what the right way to work with those groups are. And the dbGaP data needs to be available, and what is the right authentication authorization protocols required for that to actually happen. We're aware of those things, and we're working through those, but we still expect this data to be made available in those environments. So it's not a case that it's going to hinder us. We're working with those groups to actively change and to figure out how to do that. If we don't, then I don't think we've achieved what we need to do in the data commons, which is really change the way we're handling large, complex data and making it accessible and usable to a broader community that can either use it themselves or develop their own tools and systems over the top of it.
So there's a question about the term consortium and the way that we're using it. It is a little of an overloaded term. All of the groups of people that are going to be working on this will come together with NIH staff to form the Data Commons Pilot Consortium. That will include investigators from TopMed, GTEx, and the model organism databases. You are welcome to submit a team or consortium in response to this solicitation. You can bring together whatever expertise you need across academia, non-profits, for-profits, whatever it is you believe that needs to be done as a team, which we're also calling a consortium, because that's not confusing.
Right.
This is actually an opportunity to kind of think about how we do business in a creative manner. We need to get away from our traditional ways of doing grants and contracts, and we're reaching out to you all to help inform us on how to move forward.
There's also noted words, I noticed the word here, confusion, fast, etc. For all the reasons I mentioned before, I hope that I've tried to explain we're all in the same boat, but we want to keep openness as an important standard, both in what we develop for this project and also how we communicate. So we have an awesome communication team here, and they've done a fabulous job in getting out all these announcements and getting us up and running today. We've had a lot of discussions around what's the right way that we can communicate with the community in future about what's happening with this pilot, so that the community is aware of it. If you are seeing something that's really valuable that you think is really important, that there's a way for you to contribute ideas or thoughts, so that it is not a closed system. That is not our intention here. I think if we're going to develop something open, we also have to be open about the way we communicate. The communication plan is not, I don't think it's solid. I think we're just working through those pieces, but we're definitely open to hear communication and concepts from the community of how do we unconfuse you, how do we keep you updated in what we're doing, and how do we keep you engaged when there are other places to engage with.
Hello, I could possibly speak quickly to the minimal viable product question. So the idea of user cases was originally to have an idea of how to integrate different omics layers, for example, and with a minimal viable product, one possible way of seeing that is that a user case can be presented with limited amounts of data and limited amounts of underlying technology. And so a thin slice through that user case type analysis is that a minimal viable product would basically represent on a small scale what the analysis result would be for a minimal viable product. And so the underlying standardization with the data comments would be the challenge, to have that in that minimal viable product.
Do you want to announce who you are, because I didn't introduce you?
Oh. I'm sorry, my name is Martin Lirkes. I've been involved with the Data Commons pilot also, and I'm at the NHLBI in the capacity of project scientist for bioinformatics.
Right. Apparently a recurring question is? Marie's going to say something.
Yeah, so this is Marie again. In respect to the question of will LOIs be reviewed in whole or by key capability, I wouldn't like to presume the results of the review. I would add that the announcement is very clear that if the intent is to apply for more than one key capability, we actually provide space for how you intend for these objectives to interact. I think that if you do that, then that will be seriously looked at. So I wouldn't like to presume what the effect of the review is, bearing in mind that OTs are a very flexible mechanism.
Can't do that right now. Right. This is an important time in NIH where the community has to work as a team, and the timeline does not permit that to happen. I see where you're coming from. I'm just going to reiterate what I said before. We're both having to work fast, you and us. Unfortunate, but as I mentioned before, this is just the starting point. We're trying to do this, again, as a community of people helping us how we would do it, not prescribing how to do that. So the first step is really simply a scoping point, and that is going to give us 180 days to look at a timeline of what we'd actually build, and we'd be open about that. You're not going to suddenly find out what it is at the end of 180 days. We want to be clear about what it is we're developing as we go along, because we do want to include the community. The question, is the following correct? As a stage 1 applicant, my company could make a proposal and work in isolation if it's funded, except for the obligate meeting. or is it the case that my stage 1 project, if funded, will be folded in with other collaborative projects to entertain a collaborative consortium? Business companies, we understand that you have certain proprietary things that you want to do, but this is all about creating the right connections. And to the person who wrote the previous statement, we want to create a team, and I recognize that's complicated when you're dealing with commercial entities, but I think we also have plenty of examples where commercial entities do work well with academia, and we're looking for ways to learn from our past and also from some of our colleagues in the commercial field to help us better understand how we could work with you as well.
There have been a couple of questions regarding whether additional partners can be added to the proposal after the letter of intent is submitted. The answer is yes. However, your letter of intent must demonstrate a team or an organization that is capable of meeting the key goals that you are submitting against. You can come in with others to bolster that in your proposal, but you have to demonstrate in your letter of intent that you are capable of doing it with the people you have.
There's a question about the expected involvement of the intramural research program. Through this funding mechanism, intramural investigators are not allowed to apply.
That's true. Research, we know we have to have research and state, and we're keeping that aligned, but we know that there's a need internally. I'm just looking at other questions here. Anyone else?
So I do have a question. Can you speak to whether or not there is a particular desire to see applicants submit in a collaborative capacity, or would there be a bias against, say, an applicant who felt that they could satisfy all the key capabilities?
There is no bias. I would only say that if you want to come in and do all of the capabilities and simply think that you can do all of that, you better be able to justify it very well. That's one. And two, how are you going to collaborate with other people that are going to need to be able to interoperate with the systems that you're suggesting? This is not a closed system. Even if you come in as a, quote, consortium of collection of people of academia and commercial, we want to see how you're reaching out to the community as well with your system. I think that's... Anyone else want to add anything to that? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. We're still working through some of this. We've got through many of the chat boxes. I'm looking back now at some of the documents that have come in before. So if there's a bit of silence on this end, it's just we're trying to ascertain the questions. Anyone else? Questions you want to answer? Question here about, again, about budgets. Should budgets include any estimates for work to be performed after the first 180 days? I think we should just look at the first budget period of time because, quite frankly, stage 2 will likely be fiction. And we just want to be realistic. As much as we've asked you to base it in reality, we want to keep it in reality as well. So we want to look at stage 1 at the moment.
I would also remind everyone that in stage 2, for moving to stage 2, we are going to be asking again for a budget.
Yep, good point.
Everyone needs to understand that this is not a stagnant type of mechanism, that it will be negotiated as more information becomes available and as we identify the capabilities of the partners working together. So we may be in a situation of continuous negotiation depending on what's going on.
Good point. So, question here is, when fashioning a project team, should technology developers seek out scientists who might use these technologies? That's dependent upon what you want to answer. If it's looking at the low level, some of the IT infrastructure, it's obviously not necessarily directly related to the use case, but if it speeds it up, it allows a user to access a lot of data very quickly, and it's cost efficient both in times and potentially dollars. That's a direct connection to the ability to do science, even though it may not address how you would cure a disease. but I think it's relevant in this case, and it touches on the fact that this is both an equivalence of technology and biomedical. We're trying to fuse those two things together, so both have equivalences. So you don't necessarily need to have a scientist. It would help you if a scientist tells you, hey, this would be faster if I could do X. But it's not a requirement for you to do that. Again, it's how do you address the components of what the solicitation is asking you.
So I just wanted to answer the question again about whether or not LOIs will be considered in their entirety or per key capability that's being proposed to be addressed, by pointing out that there is a specific space, there is space allocated in the LOI if the intent is to address more than one key capability. That, I think, will be considered quite seriously by the review panel. I cannot, at this moment, presume what the results of the review will be. I would only point out that there is space to make such a justification and that this is meant to be a flexible mechanism.
Another question came in, should applicants attempt to link their proposals to other proposals? Will it strengthen the proposal to note synergies between two proposals submitted by two different PIs? I think that's a very important question to ask, considering that the collaboration that's going to be required of a nimble team to accomplish a goal. I don't know if anybody else want to jump in and comment to that.
I just wanted to clarify, a budget is requested for stage 1. You shouldn't submit a budget for the entire 4 years, but a budget is required for stage 1.
There's another question about FWA and IRB. Will it be required to operate the data commons pilot? And our understanding is that the human data is de-identified, which would not required. And there's statements that NCI CGC pilots and TCGA DCC and Target DCC did not have one. This will be something that we will iron out in negotiations as we move along, depending on who is offered to participate under this program.
The question there about team size, there is no...
Teresa, this is Cashel Jaquish from NHLBI.
Yes.
One of the data sets in particular that will be available for pilot study does require IRB approval. It's the Framingham.
That is something we don't want to presume we know who's coming in with what collaboration, and so generically that is something that we would do at the time of award. But your point is well taken, Cashel, and thank you very much for letting us know.
Okay, I think we've almost got to the end of the questions. Is that, I've been running through those, you guys, as well?
There's one that just got submitted. Although no budget stage 1.
Okay, so another question came in about the budget of whether stage 1, should you include just stage 1 for the first 180 days, or should you include after in phase 2? You know, we're really interested in the 180-day pilot period. If you were to include additional information, you know, it's just going to be, it's just a placeholder. It's not going to be fully vetted until we move to that phase and we actually enter into negotiation if you're selected to participate.
Right, and the one I started answering before was team size. There is no limit or maximum. Again, it's relative to what you think is appropriate for the project to accomplish what you need to get done.
Remember, in a team environment, you have to have a lead who is going to kind of represent the collective with the government, that all of you all have to have an agreement amongst yourself on how you're going to operate, because we will not broker that deal for you.
Okay, we've gone through almost all of the questions I think we've got under the chat box. That's right. All right, so the last question, one of the questions that came in was, what are your expectations on how the artifacts after 3 to 4 years of this OTA will interact with the NCI activities like the GDC and the CGC? So we've had a lot of conversations with folks internally at NIH, as I mentioned before. Patty Brennan has been excellent in working with us in NCBI and figuring out how to work with. We're aware of those issues, so are they, and there's a spirit of collaboration happening there. And I'd also like to point out that we've been working closely with Warren Kibbe and the folks over at NCI and their GDC, and there are other collaborations around the institutes that are looking at these kind of things. We fully want to operate with those. There are certainly elements from phase 1 of BD2K we'd want to reuse and certainly make available. What do we expect for our artifacts after 3-4 years? Part of our goal here is to make these large, high-level data sets accessible to the community. What does it take to do that? What are the costs associated to do that? What are the set of services on a computational level, a series of APIs, potentially, that allow you to access it? And what are the ways that we need that are technology-based that support the use of these data sets by folks that don't have computational backgrounds? These are all the kinds of things we're trying to address in some of these pilots, and we're expecting it to be one step along that how we that is complete students. Okay, thank you. So that's what I would say there now. Back to that.
You were challenging their strategic vision to accomplish this goal. Yes. Oh, no,
sorry, could you, the second half of your answer to what's sort of the big picture goal, could you repeat that? Because there was somebody who put the thing on hold, and pretty much everything you said as sort of the 3 to 4 years onwards, I couldn't figure out what was being said. It was just music.
Okay, I've got to try and remember. This is in relation to what I just said. Let's see if I can remember. Essentially, we're spending a lot of time collaborating across all of NIH, and we're all having very similar problems across the different institutes. We're also collaborating with Patty Brennan over at NLM and NCBI, and the goal here is to look at how do we address the issues of accessibility of data and utility and use of it in these environments, because we know we're going to have to use some of that across all of the institutes. So at the end of this, we don't want a siloed product. We want to be able to see how does this actually affect the way that the different institutes work, and how do those pieces enable us to go to the next step to maintain the longer-term value for this particular project. There may be things out of this pilot that will be shut down because we'll learn that we just don't need those, or we learned from it, we know that we need something different, better, going in a different direction. We're also aware that technology changes very, very rapidly. So what is valid in the next 180 days may be changing over time, and therefore that is one of the reasons to bring folks in with different backgrounds that have some of the background in the technologies, because you are working in these fields that are rapidly moving. So we want to engage with you because we also need to be able to structure what we do next to be relevant to where the community is and where it needs to be technologically to be able to address these issues, not at the end of 180 days, address something that we should have done 180 days ago. That's, the upside of the government is that we are trying to make this open and engage the community. The downside is that sometimes we're a little bit behind the curve in some of the technologies. And in this case, what we're trying to use the OT is to leverage that to go to our future. I hope there was no music after that.
Thank you.
Maybe music. Do you want to?
Yeah, so I just want to address the question about whether or not the LOI and the application is only meant to describe the first 180 days. We would like you to be as specific as possible about the activities that you plan in the 180-day period, but I would remind you that the application does ask for a vision statement, and that is clearly longer than 180 days.
All right, almost got to the end. Team, do we have any other ones that we want to? Okay, so we've been scrolling through our chat box, and I've been going through some of the questions that were already posted. We're working at light speed here, so, and I think people are starting to drop off the call. So at this point, what I would say, if you have a burning question, please add it to the chat box now. If you feel that it's more appropriate for you to say something out loud, do it now, and hopefully we'll mute you if we get music, but do that now. There's no need to continue if people have got to the end of their questions. Okay. All right. So, those of you still on the line, I think we want to say any other comments? Around the okay. So, thank you very much for spending an hour and a half with us. And I'm doing